What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our SEC football channel.
How could an SEC champion possibly miss the playoffs? So if you look at the SEC West, you can pretty much forget it. That team is not going to survive an Alabama-LSU matchup. And then if you're Alabama, get through Auburn and still make the SEC championship game and have 2 losses and miss the playoff. Yes, it's possible if all just chaos ensues and things that are unreasonable to expect. Yes, there could be a 2-loss SEC Western Division winner, and then they could win the title game in the SEC and miss the playoff. It's possible. It's not going to happen. But how could it happen on the other side? So we talked about the Florida-Georgia game coming up this Saturday. Both teams already have 1 loss. The winner of that game, of course, owns the advantage in division and also a tiebreaker. So this game pretty much locks up the division. After this game, we will only have, 3 games left? And again, it's almost like having a 2-game lead. The leader will have a win advantage in the SEC, but also the tiebreaker, so a 2-game advantage over the loser of the game. So if that's Florida, let's say Florida beats Georgia. They pull off the minor upset. I think they're about a 3 to 4 point underdog at this point. Florida's got a game against Vanderbilt, and they end the season with Florida State. Obviously, that doesn't affect the SEC race, but that would be a mark against their college football playoff resume with as bad as Florida State is right now. In between, Florida goes to Missouri. And this has been the one team in the SEC East that has given Florida fits in recent years. Missouri has looked bad in recent weeks, but the game's in Columbia, and Florida was a better team than Missouri last year, but even in the Swamp, lost to the Tigers by 16 points. So, could Florida beat Georgia this Saturday, then against the likes of Vanderbilt, at Missouri, and Florida State, possibly lose another game, finish 10-2, win the SEC championship game at 11-2, and miss the college football playoff? All right, let's look at Georgia's run. Their slate after the Florida game here. So Georgia sits now with 1 loss to South Carolina, so it's not a good loss. I don't think it's a horrible loss, but it's certainly not a good loss, and becomes a much worse loss with South Carolina showing in Knoxville over the weekend, losing by 20 points to Tennessee. So it's not a good showing for Georgia, losing at home against South Carolina, a team that is now, I believe, 3-5. And this is what Georgia has after the Florida game. So let's say Georgia wins as expected. They still have 1 loss, a pretty bad loss to South Carolina at home. They still, after getting by Florida, have to deal with Missouri, a trip to Auburn, and Texas A&M at home. A trip to Auburn. Look at what Oregon's doing in the Pac-12 right now. They just won a big ball game against Washington State on Saturday night. They have 1 loss. They have a couple of difficult games ahead of them, but they could certainly survive the Pac-12. Either they could or Utah could with 1 loss and with a string of victories behind them. Oklahoma, 1 loss. Baylor, no losses in the Big 12. Is it conceivable to think that Baylor could finish undefeated? Not really. But is it possible? Is it in play as we enter November? Yes, it is. Baylor's undefeated. Ohio State, of course, undefeated. The winner of the Ohio State-Penn State game could finish undefeated in the Big Ten. We have all sorts of scenarios there in which, especially if Ohio State's the loser against Penn State, but are still impressing the College Football Playoff Selection Committee otherwise, that maybe the Big Ten sneaks in a couple teams. And Clemson pretty much has it in lockdown mode, you would think, in the ACC. So does it start to get crowded across the nation for an SEC Eastern Division champion that wins in Atlanta with 2 losses? Georgia's got Missouri at Auburn, where, as things stand right now, they might be a slight underdog. I think it could be in the range of a pick'em game. And let's not underestimate Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, even though that game's in Athens. And Texas A&M has been a large disappointment in the SEC this year. It's still a very talented team, talented roster that will have nothing to play for, with no pressure, but to go into Athens and pull off the upset and feel good about themselves. So again, could the SEC champion miss the playoff? And when you're thinking about that possibility, think Florida and really, really think Georgia.